The next part of the Unit 8 information is Section 2 in Chapter 17. I'm going to throw some solid amounts of vocabulary here at you, and you need to know the difference between them. So, first of all, distinguishing between morphological and biochemical characters. I want you to look at morph, and I want you to look at biochemical. The root of this word morphological means, morph means shape. Writing's not very good here. Shape in terms of body structure. So a morphological characteristic is a homologous part, like the forelimbs that we studied last chapter. We look at the shapes of the body and compare those, and we look for similarities, and that's one of the reasons, or one of the ways, that classification was done before we knew about DNA. Today, we look a little bit more at the biochemical characters, the DNA sequences and the protein structures, and look at the degree of relationship there. You also looked at that last chapter with the biochemical evidence, that little paper lab that we did, when you were looking at that the human and the gorilla DNA, or the amino acid sequences of hemoglobin were more similar than human and horse or gorilla and horse. And then one of the statistics that we know is that we share 98% of our DNA with chimps. So the difference between morphological, morph means shape or body structure. Biochemical, we're looking at living chemical things, or the chemical makeup of living things. And that's the DNA sequence and protein structure. The next thing you need to know the difference between is ancestral and derived characters, and you'll see what those mean on the next slide. I'll give you the background, the definitions, and then I'll show you them in practice on the next one. Ancestral characters, just like it sounds like, an ancestor is someone in the past. An ancestral characteristic have been a part of the body structure for a long period of time. So it's found within an entire related line of organisms. So all of the ancestors have this same characteristic. A derived characteristic develops more recently, and these are the things that are used to branch different organisms off of the diagram that I'm going to show you on the next slide, which is a cladogram. So we'll have the ancestral characteristics that are shared by all of the organisms in a cladogram. The derived characteristics, the unique characteristics to different organisms, split them off. So this is a cladogram, and again we're looking at ancestral characteristics versus derived characteristics. This is a cladogram, and what we're seeing here is we're tracing this line up through, and these are the different derived characteristics. So first we have jaws, and when you look at jaws right here, this makes the lack of a jaw makes the hagfish unique from everybody else. Every other organism in this line, in this cladogram, has jaws except for the hagfish. So we put jaw right here between the hagfish and the rest of everybody. So then if we're looking at this a little bit differently. Now we look at lungs. Lungs are shared by all of these guys. The perch has gills. It's a fish. It doesn't have gills. So lungs separate the hagfish and the perch from the rest of these guys. Then we have claws or nails. The salamander doesn't have these. So that divides, this derived character divides the salamander, the perch, and the hagfish from the lizard, the pigeon, the mouse, and the chimp. So that divides the cladogram into two parts here. Then we look at the pigeon. The pigeon branches off because it has feathers. But these guys don't have feathers, so it splits off off of the line, the actual line of the cladogram. So feathers are up here. Still separates birds from everybody else, but it's not shared by the mouse and the chimp as well. And then finally we have fur and mammary glands. Separates the mouse and the chimp from everybody else. So fur and mammary glands are shared by these guys up here, but not here. So what kind of a derived character could we use to separate the chimp from the mouse? What could we do here? What kind of a characteristic does a chimp have that a mouse does not? How about a thumb, an opposable thumb? Look at your thumb right now. You can use it to grasp things. Oops. Opposable thumb. The B is in the black area there. But opposable thumb could be a derived character that separates the chimp from everybody else. So this is a cladogram. Let me know in class if you have any questions about this. Some more about classification. So a cladogram, the more derived characters two organisms share, the more related they are. So if we look, the more derived characters they share, the more closely related they are. If we go back, the mouse and the chimp, right here, share fur, mammary glands, claws or nails, lungs, and jaws. They share all of those, so they're the most closely related. That's what that means. And then what you've been working on in class, and you will continue to work on in class, are these dichotomous keys. These dichotomous keys are another way to classify organisms using paired descriptions, as you've been seeing in class. The characteristic that we run on, that we assume at this point that all organisms have in common, their genetic code. They use DNA and RNA to pass on information from one generation to the next. This is the characteristic that all living things have in common. A molecular clock actually isn't on the test, but this is sort of what we looked at with the human, gorilla, and horse proteins, the hemoglobin proteins in that lab, except we looked at the proteins instead of the DNA, but it's the same sort of concept. Looks at the number of differences in DNA, which we call mutations, between two different organisms. And the differences, the more differences there are, the less related the two organisms are, the two species are. So longer ago they diverged from a common ancestor. We're going to continue with 17.3 in another screencast. Look for that later on.